As Iranians pour into the streets to protest their brutal regime, reports are now coming out that dozens of people have been killed. But what's the reality on the ground? Well, Iranian American journalist Karmel Melamed is here with the breaking details. Karmel, no one knows the situation better than you. What's happening right now?
It's intensified. We're not hearing what's going on the ground from mainstream media in the U.S. and the West. These protests are going on day 10. You've had 30 to 35 people killed by the regime's thugs and goons. It's not getting reported on. You've had close to 1,000 people that have been arrested. That's not being reported on. In many of the cities and provinces, people are fighting back against the regime's thugs. That's not being reported on. Today, you had the regime's thugs fire tear gas inside of a hospital in Tehran. That's not getting reported on, and that's not the first time. Several days ago, they did the same thing in another hospital in Iran. A lot of the fear that people had from previous years from the regime has really collapsed. We're seeing a lot of the protesters really empty-handed, fighting back. They don't have arms like the regime's forces, but sometimes with their bare hands, with pieces of wood, pieces of steel pipe, occasional Molotov cocktails. They're fighting back as much as they can. The message is we need help. They're not asking for America and the West to do regime change. They're willing to do it on their own. They just want our help in fighting back against these armed thugs of the regime that are literally mowing them down.
Well, Carmel, why is basically no Western outlet reporting the facts on the ground? I've seen a couple places talk about what you said, but in large part, like you said, it is being swept under the rug. Why do you think that is?
Partially, it has to do with the fact that they don't have reporters on the ground in Iran. Usually, Western reporters have to be vetted by the regime to be allowed on the ground. And even if they would be allowed into Iran, they wouldn't be able to give accurate coverage. That's a part of it. But I think the other part of it is it's just laziness on the part of mainstream media. For whatever reason, they don't want to give coverage to this story because it may not be, sexy. It may not be as, intense as Gaza or the war with Israel. And that's a real shame because these are innocent people, millions of people. Let's not forget, Raj, you're looking at 90 million people in Iran that are yearning. They're close to 50 years of being held under this repressive regime. And they're yearning for freedom. And it's very close to it. We spoke last month, I don't know if you remember, and I told you there's stuff brewing in Iran. It's not good. There's been some coverage, I'm not saying there hasn't been, but it hasn't been enough. They're not getting the details of what's happening on the ground.
Well, Carmel, you were born in Iran. You're fluent in Farsi, and I know you've been telling me you've been talking to people on the ground using different apps, and so you're very aware of what's actually happening. Here's a question I find kind of fascinating: how has the whole dynamic changed since President Trump took out Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela? Has that been a wake-up call to the regime?
Oh, it definitely has. Basically, the Trump administration took away one of the key allies of the regime in Iran. Let's not forget that for the past 20 to 25 years, the Venezuelan government under Chavez and Maduro were not only providing, business and trade with Iran and the regime as far as their oil, but they were helping Iran with a lot of the narco trafficking. There are thousands and thousands of passports that were issued to the regime's terrorists, Hezbollah and Hamas, by the Venezuelan government to be traveling all over Latin America and even the U.S. So the taking out of Maduro has frightened the Ayatollahs. They know that President Trump is serious about the situation, and they might be next. They understand he's not just rhetoric. There's some action behind it. I think they're also frightened because President Trump voiced support for the protesters recently. And the one thing that the regime is frightened of, it's not frightened of Israel, it's not as frightened of America, it's frightened of its own people that it's been repressing for the last 46 years. And when you tell the people of Iran that America is locked and loaded, that's going to make the Ayatollahs be shaking in their boots right now. What I'm hearing from people on the ground in Iran is President Trump, it's locked and loaded. You need to pull the trigger. They're shooting us. They're killing us, and they are. The regime's forces are using live ammunition on protesters, and they're asking, where's America? Where's President Trump? He promised us in that Truth social media post, and recently he made that comment of supporting the people. Well, where is he? And they want him to pull the trigger.
Wow, that is absolutely fascinating and insightful. Karmel, the last question I'll ask you is always the question is, will this be the time? Will this be the protest that finally makes that change? And as someone who has their finger on the pulse of what's happening on the ground, do you see the framework, the shifting, where this one, unlike all the other ones we've talked about, might actually be the tipping point?
I think it will, Raj. We're looking at regime change in Iran by the people, and it's different than before for a lot of factors. Number one is perhaps the economy. You got close to 1.5 million Iranian rials, their currency, to a dollar. Their inflation is runaway. People can't afford basic foods and necessities. So that regime is really on the downside economically. Secondly, they don't have the forces. They don't have enough repression forces. They're thugs and their goons. They're IRGC and Besiege. A lot of those thugs and goons were taken out during the 12-day war last summer with Israel. A lot of them have been taken out by Israel over the last 2 years in Lebanon and Syria and Iraq. So the regime doesn't have the forces to, suppress the people as it did before. Likewise, you've got a larger segment of Iranians out there protesting. Before, in that women life freedom movement, you had, mostly women and younger people. Today, you've got the merchants, the bazaar. They're out. They're striking. You have industrial workers. They're striking. Young and old. People are just fed up, and they're getting larger and larger. These protests are not dying down. We're on day 10, and you got protests in about 23 provinces and 60 cities across Iran. And it's just intensifying each day. There's going to be a tipping point, Raj, where you're going to have hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions in the street, and the regime won't be able to stop them. It's just spiraling out of control, and eventually it's going to be toppled. You're not seeing the Russians, you're not seeing the Chinese. No one is stepping up to help this regime, and they've got a lot of problems internally. You don't have electricity in many parts of the cities in Iran. You don't have water flow in Tehran. The largest city of 10 million is water shortages. How are people going to survive? They're just going to continue pouring out in the streets, and something's got to give very, very shortly. We need to support the people. We need to ask our elected officials, the president, the administration, please step up and help them. You promised to help them. They're not looking for you to topple the regime. They'll do it themselves. They just need protection from their goons and the thugs that are mowing them down in the streets. I kind of compare it to what President Reagan did during the 80s with the Solidarity movement in Poland. President Reagan, Prime Minister Thatcher in England, they both stood up for the protesters and that freedom movement in Poland and in Eastern Europe when they were fighting against the repressive forces of communism. And they said, you can't do this. You can't do this to innocent people. And I think if the administration does that today and stands with the people of Iran, you're going to have a historic freedom for about 90 million people. And perhaps peace will really come very soon to the entire region.
Wow. Wow. Well, Karmel, that was incredibly insightful. Thank you again. That was very, very informative. Karmel Melamed, my friend, God bless.
Thank you.